I worked 2 jobs so my husband could finish med school. Then he left me, saying he couldn't love someone who reminded him of his struggle. The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, exactly 6 months after David walked out. I stood in my bathrobe holding the certified mail envelope, staring at the words, "Notice to quit or pay rent," printed in bold letters across the top. $3,400 past due. I had 30 days. I called the property management company from my kitchen phone, the same phone David and I had used to order takeout during his residency interviews 3 years earlier. The woman who answered spoke in that practiced tone customer service representatives use when they deliver bad news all day long. "Mrs. Chen, our records show you're currently 3 months behind on rent payments. The total amount due is $3,400, not including late fees and court costs." I explained that I'd been making partial payments, sending whatever I could scrape together for my 2 jobs. She interrupted before I could finish. "Partial payments don't constitute full payment under the terms of your lease agreement. You'll need to pay the full amount by April 15th or vacate the premises." After she hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and calculated my finances on the back of a utility bill. My job at the medical billing company paid $14 an hour, 32 hours a week, because they kept everyone just under full time to avoid providing benefits. The weekend catering gig brought in maybe $200 a month, depending on how many events I could book. Total monthly income, roughly $1,900. Rent alone was $2,200. The math was impossible, but I'd been making it work through a combination of credit cards, borrowed money from my parents, and sheer determination. David's departure had eliminated his resident salary of $54,000 a year. Modest by doctor standards, but enough to keep us afloat while I worked 2 jobs to cover everything else. I pulled out the folder where I kept all our financial documents from the divorce proceedings. David's lawyer had argued that since he'd graduated medical school with $400,000 in debt, he couldn't afford alimony payments. My lawyer had countered that I'd sacrificed my own career advancement to support him through 8 years of medical training. The judge had awarded me temporary spousal support of $800 a month for 2 years, which sounded reasonable until you factored in the cost of living in Boston. The irony wasn't lost on me that David was now making 6 figures as a second-year resident at Massachusetts General, while I faced eviction from the apartment we'd shared for 4 years. The same apartment where I'd studied for my own graduate school entrance exams at the kitchen table, while he slept off 36-hour shifts. The same apartment where I'd maintained a color-coded calendar tracking his rotation schedules, board exam dates, and residency application deadlines. I called my supervisor at MedBill Solutions and explained I needed to pick up additional hours. Janet's voice carried that familiar mix of sympathy and frustration that came from managing overworked employees in an understaffed office. "Sarah, you're already at our maximum for part-time employees. If I give you more hours, I'd have to classify you as full-time and provide health insurance. Corporate won't approve that with the current budget constraints. What if I worked off the books? Just temporary data entry or filing? You know I can't do that. The compliance department audits our payroll records quarterly." I hung up and immediately called Elite Events, the catering company where I worked weekends. The owner, Marcus, answered on the 3rd ring. "Sarah, perfect timing. I've got a wedding reception Saturday that needs additional servers. 12-hour shift starts at 10 in the morning. I'll take it. And Marcus, do you have anything during the week? Office parties, corporate events, anything? Let me check the calendar. There's a pharmaceutical company doing a product launch Thursday evening. It's downtown, so you'd need to factor in transportation costs, but it pays $25 an hour." I accepted immediately and spent the rest of the morning calling everyone in my network looking for additional work opportunities. My college roommate worked for a house cleaning service and said they needed someone for emergency cleanups. My neighbor's sister managed a dog walking business and could use weekend help. I signed up for everything, calculating that if I worked 7 days a week for the next month, I might be able to scrape together enough money to avoid eviction. The pharmaceutical event Thursday night was held at the Four Seasons, the same hotel where David and I had attended his medical school graduation dinner. I spent 6 hours serving appetizers to executives discussing drug pricing strategies while wearing a black uniform that made me invisible to everyone, except when they needed their wine glasses refilled. During my break, I stood in the hotel bathroom looking at myself in the mirror. My reflection showed someone I barely recognized, thin from stress and irregular meals, dark circles under my eyes from working double shifts, hands cracked from constant dishwashing at catering events. I was 29 years old and felt like I'd aged a decade in the past 6 months. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Need to pick up some books I left in the closet. We'll come by Sunday afternoon." I stared at the message for several minutes before responding. "I'll leave them outside the door. I won't be home." That wasn't entirely true. I'd be home, but I couldn't handle seeing him pull up in the BMW he'd bought with his signing bonus while I faced eviction from our former shared apartment. The last time we'd spoken face-to-face was during the divorce proceedings, when his lawyer had presented evidence of my comfortable lifestyle, supported by his medical school loans. Mrs. Chen maintained a standard of living that included dining out, travel, and entertainment expenses while my client was in school, his attorney had argued. She benefited from the investment in his education and should not now claim financial hardship. My lawyer had countered with documentation of my work history. 4 years as a medical scribe during David's undergraduate pre-med program, 3 years as a research assistant during his medical school years, followed by 2 years working multiple jobs during his residency. The judge had been sympathetic but explained that Massachusetts law limited spousal support duration and amount based on the length of the marriage and both parties' earning potential. Saturday morning, I arrived at the wedding venue at 9:30 to help set up for a reception expecting 300 guests. The bride was marrying a cardiothoracic surgery fellow, and I spent the day serving dinner to doctors and their families while wearing the same black uniform I'd worn to serve pharmaceutical executives 2 days earlier. During the cocktail hour, I overheard conversations discussions about vacation homes in the Hamptons, private school applications for children, and investment portfolios. One woman complained about her husband's call schedule interfering with their dinner party plans. Another discussed hiring a full-time nanny so she could return to her interior design business. I refilled water glasses and cleared plates while listening to people discuss problems I would have killed to have. The bride's father, a prominent surgeon, gave a toast about sacrifice and dedication, praising his daughter for supporting her husband through his surgical training. The groom thanked his new wife for her patience and understanding during his residency years. Nobody mentioned the financial sacrifice, the career delays, the isolation, or the stress that came with supporting someone through medical training. Nobody talked about what happened when the person you'd supported decided they'd outgrown you once they achieved success. The event ended at midnight, and I helped break down tables and load equipment into trucks until 2 in the morning. Marcus paid me in cash, $300 for 14 hours of work. I drove home through empty streets, calculating that I'd earned nearly enough to make a partial rent payment, but still fell short of the full amount due. Sunday afternoon, I found David's books stacked neatly outside my apartment door with a note. "Thanks, hope you're doing well." I brought them inside and sat on the couch holding his old anatomy textbook, remembering the nights I'd quizzed him on muscle origins and nerve pathways while he studied for board exams. The book fell open to a page covered in his handwriting, notes about cardiac catheterization procedures that I'd helped him organize when he was applying for cardiology fellowships. My own handwriting appeared in the margins where I'd added mnemonics and study tips that had helped him memorize complex information. I closed the book and put it back in the box with the others. Then, I called my parents to ask for a loan to cover the remaining rent money. "Sarah, honey, we've already given you $8,000 since the divorce," my mother said. "Your father's retirement account has taken a hit, and we can't keep supporting you indefinitely." "I know, Mom. I just need enough to avoid eviction, and then I'll figure something else out." "What about moving back home temporarily? You could save money and get back on your feet." The thought of moving back to my childhood bedroom in suburban Connecticut while David established his medical career felt like admitting complete defeat. But I was running out of options, and pride wasn't going to pay my rent. "Let me think about it," I said, though we both knew I was out of alternatives. Monday morning, I called the property management company to negotiate a payment plan. The same woman I'd spoken with before listened to my proposal to pay half the back rent immediately and the remainder over 3 months. "Mrs. Chen, we've already been more than accommodating by accepting partial payments for 3 months. The property owner has instructed us to proceed with eviction proceedings if full payment isn't received by the deadline. I'm working 2 jobs and picking up every additional shift I can find. I just need more time to get caught up. I understand your situation, but we have a business to run. Other tenants are watching to see how we handle delinquent accounts." After she hung up, I sat in my car in the MedBill Solutions parking lot and cried for the first time since David left. Not the angry tears I'd shed during our final argument, but the exhausted, defeated tears of someone who'd run out of fight. My supervisor Janet found me in the parking lot 20 minutes later and knocked on my car window. I rolled it down and tried to compose myself, but she could see I'd been crying. "Sarah, what's going on? You've been working yourself to death for months." I explained about the eviction notice and my financial situation. Janet listened without interrupting, then surprised me with an offer. "Corporate just approved a new full-time position in our accounts receivable department. It's 40 hours a week with benefits, but the pay is only $16 an hour. Are you interested? The additional income would help, but I'd have to give up my weekend catering work to accommodate a Monday through Friday schedule." I calculated quickly. 40 hours at $16 an hour would gross me $2,600 a month before taxes. Probably $2,100 take-home. Still not enough to cover rent and living expenses, but closer to manageable. "I'll take it," I said. "When can I start?" "Next Monday. HR will need you to fill out new paperwork, and you'll have a 90-day probationary period." That evening, I called Marcus to explain I'd have to stop working weekend events. He was understanding, but disappointed because I'd been one of his most reliable servers. "If you ever need weekend work again, call me," he said. "You're always welcome back." I spent the week transitioning to full-time hours and trying to calculate whether my increased income would be enough to convince the property management company to work with me. The math was still tight, but I had hope for the first time in months. Friday afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. The woman on the other end identified herself as Dr. Jennifer Walsh from Massachusetts General Hospital. "Mrs. Chen, I'm calling about Dr. David Chen. I understand you were married to him." My stomach dropped. "Yes, we're divorced. Is he okay?" "Dr. Chen is fine. I'm calling because there's been an incident involving professional conduct, and your name came up during our investigation." She explained that David was under review for allegedly falsifying patient records and billing for procedures he hadn't performed. The hospital's compliance department was investigating, and they discovered that some of the falsified documentation had been created using skills David claimed to have learned while working with medical billing systems. Dr. Chen told investigators that his ex-wife worked in medical billing and had taught him about documentation requirements. "We need to verify that information." I felt sick. David was apparently trying to use our relationship and my work experience as justification for his knowledge of billing fraud techniques. "I work in medical billing, but I never taught David anything about falsifying records. That would be illegal and completely against everything I believe in professionally." Dr. Walsh asked if I'd be willing to provide a formal statement about my work history and any conversations I'd had with David about billing practices. I agreed, though I was terrified about being pulled into a professional misconduct investigation. The next week, I met with hospital administrators and provided a detailed statement about my work experience and my relationship with David. I explained that while I'd helped him with study materials and administrative tasks during medical school, I'd never discussed billing fraud or documentation manipulation. The investigator, a serious woman in her 50s, asked specific questions about David's character and any concerning behavior I'd observed during our marriage. Mrs. Chen, did your ex-husband ever express frustration about his income level or discuss ways to increase his earnings through billing practices? I thought carefully before answering. David had complained constantly about resident salaries and medical school debt, but I'd never heard him discuss anything unethical. He was stressed about money, but I never heard him talk about falsifying records or fraudulent billing. He was actually very careful about documentation when I helped him with research projects. The investigator made notes and asked if David had ever shown signs of entitlement or belief that rules didn't apply to him. That question hit closer to home. He could be arrogant, especially after he started getting recognition for his clinical work. He sometimes made comments about deserving better compensation or treatment than he was receiving. 2 weeks later, Dr. Walsh called to update me on the investigation. David had been suspended pending a full review, and the case had been referred to the Massachusetts Board of Registration in Medicine for potential disciplinary action. Your statement was helpful in establishing that Dr. Chen's knowledge of billing systems came from somewhere other than legitimate training, she said. The hospital appreciates your cooperation. I hung up feeling conflicted. Part of me was angry that David had tried to implicate me in his professional misconduct, but another part felt sad that his career might be destroyed, especially after everything we'd both sacrificed to get him through medical training. That same week, I received another eviction notice. Despite my increased income from the full-time position, I still couldn't catch up on the back rent quickly enough to satisfy the property management company. They'd filed for a court hearing to begin formal eviction proceedings. I hired a tenant's rights attorney using money I'd borrowed from my credit card. The lawyer, Maria Santos, reviewed my case and explained that Massachusetts law provided some protections for tenants facing eviction, but my options were limited. You can request a payment plan through the court, but you'll need to demonstrate ability to pay going forward, she said. The judge will want to see that your financial situation has stabilized. The court hearing was scheduled for the following month. In the meantime, I continued working full-time at MedBill Solutions and picked up house cleaning jobs on weekends to supplement my income. The irony of cleaning other people's homes while facing eviction from my own wasn't lost on me. I spent Saturday mornings scrubbing bathrooms in suburban mansions owned by doctors and lawyers, then returned to my apartment to find notices from debt collectors and utility companies threatening service disconnection. One Saturday, I was cleaning a house in Newton when the homeowner, a woman about my age, struck up a conversation while I worked in her kitchen. "Are you in school?" she asked. "You seem too smart to be cleaning houses long term." I explained that I was working multiple jobs while getting back on my feet after a divorce. She nodded sympathetically and mentioned that her husband was a physician. "Medical training is so hard on marriages," she said. "The hours, the stress, the financial pressure. We almost didn't make it through his residency." I finished cleaning her kitchen while she talked about the challenges of supporting a spouse through medical training. She had no idea that her cleaning lady was living the aftermath of that exact situation. The court hearing for my eviction case took place on a Thursday morning in housing court. I sat in a crowded courtroom watching other tenants plead their cases before a judge who'd clearly heard every possible excuse for non-payment of rent. When my case was called, Maria presented documentation of my employment history, my current income, and a proposed payment plan to catch up on back rent over 6 months. The property management company's lawyer argued that I'd already had multiple opportunities to pay and had failed to meet my obligations. The judge reviewed the paperwork and asked about my ex-husband's income and whether I was receiving adequate spousal support. "Your Honor, Mrs. Chen's ex-husband is currently under professional investigation and his income status is uncertain," Maria explained. "She's working full-time and has demonstrated good faith efforts to maintain payments." The judge granted me a 30-day extension to bring my account current, but warned that this was my final opportunity. If I missed the deadline, eviction would proceed immediately. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt the weight of having 30 days to come up with $3,400 while maintaining my regular expenses. Maria suggested I consider bankruptcy as a way to eliminate other debts and free up income for rent payments. "It's not ideal, but it might be your only option for long-term financial stability," she said. That weekend, I worked a house cleaning job for a family in Brookline. The house was enormous, with 6 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms that took me 8 hours to clean thoroughly. The homeowner paid me $200 in cash and mentioned they were looking for regular weekly service. "We've had trouble finding reliable help," she said. "If you're interested, we could set up a weekly arrangement." I accepted immediately, calculating that regular weekly work would provide more stable income than sporadic catering gigs. Over the next 2 weeks, I lined up 3 regular house cleaning clients, bringing in an additional $600 per month. The extra income was exactly what I needed to meet the court deadline, but I was working 7 days a week and barely sleeping. I'd wake up at 5 in the morning to get to MedBill Solutions by 7, work until 4, then drive to cleaning jobs that lasted until 8 or 9 at night. My body started breaking down from the constant work and stress. I developed chronic back pain from bending over to clean floors and bathtubs. My hands were permanently dry and cracked from cleaning chemicals. I lost 15 pounds because I rarely had time to eat proper meals. 2 days before the court deadline, I had enough money to pay the back rent. I drove to the property management office with a cashier's check for $3,400, plus additional late fees and court costs totaling another $600. The same woman who'd been handling my case looked surprised when I handed her the check. "Mrs. Chen, I have to admit, I didn't think you'd be able to pull this together." "Neither did I said honestly. She processed the payment and provided me with a receipt showing my account was current. I walked out of the office feeling simultaneously relieved and exhausted. I'd avoided eviction, but at the cost of my health and sanity. That evening, I received a call from Dr. Walsh at Massachusetts General. David's professional misconduct case had concluded with with his termination from the residency program and a formal complaint filed with the state medical board. His medical license was under review, and he faced potential criminal charges for insurance fraud. "I wanted to thank you again for your cooperation with the investigation," she said. "Your testimony helped establish that Dr. Chen acted independently in his fraudulent activities." After she hung up, I sat in my apartment thinking about the trajectory of our lives since David had left. He'd walked away from our marriage, claiming he needed to focus on his career and couldn't be with someone who reminded him of his struggles. Now his career was destroyed, and I was working myself to death to survive the financial aftermath of supporting his ambitions. The next month, I received a call from David's lawyer about the criminal charges. The attorney explained that David was facing federal wire fraud charges related to the falsified billing records, and he wanted to know if I'd be willing to provide character testimony. "Mr. Chen is hoping you might speak to his character and the pressures he was under during his medical training," the lawyer said. I thought about the request for several days. David had tried to implicate me in his professional misconduct, then asked for my help when he faced consequences. The irony was overwhelming. I called the lawyer back and declined to provide testimony. "I don't wish David any harm, but I can't vouch for his character given how he's handled our divorce and his professional responsibilities," I said. The lawyer seemed disappointed but not surprised. He mentioned that David was likely facing prison time and the permanent loss of his medical license. 6 months later, I received a final piece of mail related to David's case, a restitution order requiring him to repay nearly $200,000 in fraudulent billing claims. His assets, including the BMW and his investment accounts, were being seized to satisfy the judgment. I felt no satisfaction reading about his financial ruin. If anything, it made me sad that everything we'd both sacrificed for his medical career had been destroyed by his own poor choices. My life had stabilized somewhat by then. I'd been promoted to a supervisory role at MedBill Solutions with a salary of $22 an hour. I'd kept 2 of my regular house cleaning clients for weekend income, but dropped the third to preserve some work-life balance. I moved to a smaller, cheaper apartment in Somerville and started seeing a therapist to process the trauma of the past year. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that I'd been exhibiting symptoms of complex PTSD related to financial abuse and the stress of supporting someone through medical training. "Many partners of medical students and residents experience similar trauma," she explained. "The financial pressure, social isolation, and constant stress create conditions similar to other forms of psychological abuse. Therapy helped me recognize that David's comment about not being able to love someone who reminded him of his struggles was a form of psychological cruelty designed to make me feel responsible for his discomfort with his own choices. He benefited from your support while it served his purposes, then discarded you when it became inconvenient," Dr. Martinez said. "That's not a reflection of your worth or the value of your sacrifices." A year after the eviction crisis, I enrolled in a graduate program in healthcare administration. The program was designed for working professionals, with evening and weekend classes that accommodated my work schedule. I qualified for financial aid based on my low income, and the program would position me for higher-paying administrative roles in healthcare systems. My first semester was challenging because I was still working full-time and cleaning houses on weekends, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was moving forward rather than just surviving. During orientation, I met other students who'd supported spouses through professional training programs. One woman had worked 3 jobs while her husband completed law school, only to have him leave her for a colleague once he made partner at his firm. Another had sacrificed her own career to support her husband's PhD program, then found herself unemployable when he left her for a graduate student. "It's more common than people realize," said Dr. Patricia Williams, who taught our healthcare policy course. "Professional training programs create enormous stress on relationships, and the power dynamics often become unhealthy." She mentioned that some medical schools had started offering support services for spouses and partners, recognizing that family stress could impact student performance and professional development. "The old model of expecting partners to sacrifice everything for one person's career is unsustainable," she said. "Progressive programs are working to create more equitable support systems." I thought about how different things might have been if David's medical school had provided financial counseling, relationship support, or career guidance for spouses. Instead, we'd been left to navigate the stress and financial pressure alone, with predictable results. 2 years into my graduate program, I was offered a position as a healthcare compliance coordinator at Boston Medical Center. The job paid $65,000 a year with full benefits, more than double what I'd been earning at MedBill Solutions. My new role involved ensuring that billing practices complied with federal regulations and investigating potential fraud cases. The irony of working in compliance after David's fraud conviction wasn't lost on me, but it felt like completing a circle rather than reopening old wounds. On my first day, I met with the compliance director, who explained that my background in medical billing and my experience with fraud investigations made me an ideal candidate for the position. "We need people who understand both the technical aspects of billing and the human factors that lead to misconduct," she said. "Your perspective will be valuable in developing prevention programs." I threw myself into the work with an intensity that surprised my colleagues. I developed training programs for residents and fellows about billing compliance, created documentation protocols to prevent fraud, and investigated suspicious billing patterns. My supervisor, Dr. Jennifer Park, noticed my dedication and asked about my background during our 6-month review. "You approach this work like it's personal," she observed. "Is there a story there?" I explained about David's case and how his fraud had impacted my life. Dr. Park listened without judgment and said my experience gave me unique insight into the pressures that led to professional misconduct. "Would you be interested in presenting at our National Compliance Conference?" she asked. "Your perspective on the family impact of professional professional misconduct could be valuable for other compliance officers. I agreed, though the idea of speaking publicly about my experience made me nervous. The conference was 6 months away, giving me time to prepare a presentation about the broader implications of professional misconduct beyond just the individual practitioner. My presentation, titled Collateral Damage: How Professional Misconduct Impacts Families and Communities, was well received by the compliance community. I discussed how David's fraud had affected not just his own career, but my financial stability, mental health, and professional development. When we investigate professional misconduct, we focus on the individual perpetrator and the immediate victims, I told the audience, but we often overlook the family members who supported that person's career development and who suffer consequences for choices they didn't make. After my presentation, several compliance officers approached me with similar stories. One woman's physician husband had been convicted of prescription fraud, leaving her to raise 3 children alone while dealing with the stigma of his crimes. Another had discovered that her attorney spouse was embezzling client funds, destroying both his career and their family's reputation. There should be support resources for families dealing with professional misconduct, one attendee suggested. The current system treats family members like they're either complicit or irrelevant. That conversation sparked an idea for my graduate thesis project. I proposed developing a support program for families impacted by professional misconduct, focusing on financial counseling, career rehabilitation, and mental health services. My thesis advisor, Dr. Robert Chen, no relation to David, thankfully, was enthusiastic about the project. This is an underserved population with unique needs, he said. Your research could influence policy development at professional licensing boards and healthcare institutions. I spent the next year researching existing support programs and interviewing families who'd been impacted by professional misconduct. The stories were remarkably similar. Partners who'd sacrificed their own careers to support someone through professional training, only to face financial ruin and social stigma when that person's career was destroyed by their own poor choices. One interview particularly stayed with me. A woman named Margaret had worked as a nurse while her husband completed his dental training. When he was convicted of insurance fraud, she lost not only her marriage, but also her job, because the dental practice where she worked was owned by her husband's former partner. I gave up opportunities for advancement because his schedule came first, she told me. I turned down a promotion that would have required travel because he needed me available for his practice needs. When everything fell apart, I had no career trajectory and no financial security. Margaret's story was nearly identical to mine, except she'd been married for 15 years and had 2 children to support. She'd eventually found work as a school nurse, but her income was less than half what she'd earned in her previous position. My thesis research revealed that professional licensing boards and healthcare institutions had no systematic approach to addressing the collateral damage from professional misconduct. Family members were left to navigate financial, legal, and emotional consequences without support or resources. I presented my findings at my thesis defense, along with recommendations for policy changes at institutional and regulatory levels. The committee was impressed with the research and suggested I consider publishing the findings in a peer-reviewed journal. This work fills a significant gap in the professional misconduct literature, said Dr. Chen. It could influence how institutions approach prevention and response to professional misconduct cases. After completing my graduate degree, I was promoted to Senior Compliance Coordinator with responsibility for developing institution-wide training programs. I used my thesis research to create educational materials about the broader impacts of professional misconduct, including modules specifically designed for medical residents and fellows. The training program included case studies based on real misconduct cases, including David's situation, with identifying details changed. I found it therapeutic to transform our personal trauma into educational content that might prevent other people from making similar mistakes. Dr. Park supported my efforts to expand the program beyond Boston Medical Center. We partnered with other healthcare institutions to develop a standardized curriculum about professional ethics and the impact of misconduct on families and communities. Your work is changing how we think about professional responsibility, she told me during my annual review. The personal perspective you bring to this issue is invaluable. 3 years after David's conviction, I received an unexpected letter from him. He was serving an 18-month federal prison sentence and had apparently been participating in a rehabilitation program that required him to make amends to people he'd harmed. The letter was 2 pages long and appeared to be genuinely remorseful. He acknowledged that he'd tried to implicate me in his professional misconduct and apologized for the financial and emotional damage his actions had caused. He wrote that he'd been attending therapy to address what he called his sense of entitlement and disregard for others. I realize now that my comment about not being able to love someone who reminded me of my struggles was cruel and unfair, he wrote. You sacrificed your own opportunities to support my career, and I repaid that support by abandoning you when I no longer needed it. You deserved better from me, and I'm sorry for the pain I caused. The letter concluded with information about his restitution payments and an offer to provide additional financial support once he was released from prison and found employment. I read the letter several times before deciding how to respond. Part of me appreciated the apology, but I was also skeptical about whether David had genuinely changed or was simply going through the motions of a court-mandated rehabilitation program. I ultimately decided not to respond to the letter. While I no longer felt active anger toward David, I also didn't feel the need to provide him with forgiveness or closure. His apology was for his own benefit, not mine, and I'd already moved forward with my life without his input. Dr. Martinez, my therapist, supported my decision not to respond. You don't owe him forgiveness or engagement, she said. The fact that he's taking responsibility for his actions is positive, but it doesn't obligate you to participate in his rehabilitation rehabilitation process. 5 years after David left, I was offered a position as Director of Compliance and Ethics at a major academic medical center. The salary was $95,000 a year, nearly 5 times what I'd been earning when I faced eviction. My new role involved overseeing compliance training for medical students, residents, and faculty across multiple departments. I developed comprehensive programs addressing not just technical compliance issues, but also the ethical dimensions of professional practice and the broader impact of misconduct on communities and families. The work was personally meaningful because I was helping to prevent other people from experiencing what David and I had gone through. Every resident who completed my ethics training was less likely to make the kinds of choices that had destroyed David's career and nearly destroyed my life. I also started speaking at medical schools about the family impact of professional misconduct. My presentations were popular with students because they provided a perspective rarely discussed in traditional medical education. Your career choices don't just affect you, I would tell audiences of medical students and residents. They affect the people who've supported your training, your future patients, and your professional communities. Professional misconduct creates ripple effects that extend far beyond individual consequences. After one presentation at Harvard Medical School, a fourth-year student approached me with questions about managing financial stress during residency training. "My wife is working 2 jobs to support us while I'm in school," he said. "I worry about the pressure we're putting on our relationship, and I don't want to end up like the case studies you presented." I spent 30 minutes talking with him about healthy communication, financial planning, and maintaining perspective about career priorities versus relationship responsibilities. He seemed genuinely committed to avoiding the mistakes that had destroyed other medical marriages. "The fact that you're thinking about these issues now puts you ahead of most people," I told him. "Professional success means nothing if you destroy your personal relationships to achieve it." 6 years after David left, I met someone new. James was a social worker who specialized in helping families navigate healthcare crises. He'd been divorced for 3 years after his ex-wife left him for her business partner, so he understood the trauma of relationship betrayal. We met at a conference about healthcare ethics, where he was presenting research about family support systems during medical crises. His presentation complemented my work on professional misconduct, and we ended up having dinner together to discuss our research. James was the opposite of David in almost every way. He was genuinely interested in my career and opinions. He shared household responsibilities without being asked, and he never made me feel like my role was to support his ambitions at the expense of my own. "I learned from my first marriage that relationships require genuine partnership," he told me early in our relationship. "I'm not looking for someone to sacrifice their goals for mine." We dated for 2 years before moving in together, taking time to build trust and establish healthy communication patterns. James attended therapy with me to address our respective relationship trauma and develop skills for maintaining a balanced partnership. When we got engaged, I insisted on a prenuptial agreement that protected both of our individual assets and career development. James supported the decision completely. "After what you went through with David, I understand why financial protection is important to you," he said. "I want you to feel secure in our relationship, not vulnerable." Our wedding was small and focused on celebrating our commitment rather than impressing other people. We invited family and close friends, including several colleagues from my compliance work who'd become genuine friends over the years. Dr. Martinez, my therapist, attended the wedding and told me she was proud of how I'd rebuilt my life after the trauma of my first marriage. "You've transformed your personal experience into meaningful work that helps other people," she said. "That's the best possible outcome from a difficult situation." 7 years after David left, I received news that he'd been released from prison and was working as a medical billing clerk at a small clinic in rural Vermont. His medical license had been permanently revoked, and he was prohibited from working in any clinical capacity. The information came through professional networks because his case was still used as a training example in compliance programs. I felt no satisfaction learning about his reduced circumstances, but I also felt no sympathy. He was experiencing the natural consequences of his own choices. My life, meanwhile, had exceeded anything I'd imagined possible during those dark months when I faced eviction. I was earning more money than David and I had ever made together. I was married to someone who genuinely respected and supported me, and my work was making a meaningful difference in preventing professional misconduct. James and I bought a house in Cambridge, not far from where I'd once faced eviction. The house had 3 bedrooms, including one I converted into a home office where I worked on research projects and wrote articles for professional journals. My work on family impact of professional misconduct had been published in several peer-reviewed journals and was being cited by other researchers studying professional ethics. I'd become a recognized expert in an area that hadn't existed when I started my graduate studies. "You've created your own professional niche," James observed one evening as I worked on a presentation for an international compliance conference. "You took your personal trauma and turned it into expertise that helps other people." 8 years after David left, I was invited to testify before a congressional subcommittee about healthcare fraud prevention. My testimony focused on the need for comprehensive support systems that addressed not just technical compliance, but also the personal and family stressors that contributed to professional misconduct. "Healthcare fraud doesn't happen in a vacuum," I told the subcommittee members. "It often results from financial pressure, professional stress, and inadequate support systems during medical training. Prevention requires addressing these underlying factors, not just punishing misconduct after it occurs." Several committee members asked questions about my recommendations for policy changes. I proposed requiring medical schools and residency programs to provide financial counseling and relationship support services, similar to employee assistance programs in other industries. Medical training is uniquely stressful, with long hours, high debt loads, and intense pressure to succeed, I explained. Without adequate support systems, some individuals make poor choices that destroy their careers and harm their families and communities. My testimony was covered by several healthcare trade publications and led to invitations to consult with medical schools about developing comprehensive support programs for students and their families. 9 years after David left, James and I decided to start a family. We'd both been focused on career development and hadn't felt ready for children during our first years together, but we'd reached a point of financial and emotional stability that made parenthood feel possible. Our daughter Emma was born on a snowy February morning after 12 hours of labor. Holding her in the hospital room, I thought about how different this experience was from the stress and uncertainty I'd felt during my first marriage. James took 6 weeks of paternity leave and was genuinely involved in all aspects of childcare. We shared night feedings, diaper changes, and household responsibilities without negotiation or resentment. He never made me feel like childcare was primarily my responsibility because I was the mother. I want to be a real partner in raising Emma, he told me when she was a few weeks old. My father worked constantly and left everything to my mother. I don't want to repeat that pattern. Emma's birth coincided with a major expansion of my compliance program to medical schools across New England. I was able to negotiate a flexible work arrangement that allowed me to work from home 3 days a week while maintaining my leadership responsibilities. You've built enough credibility and expertise that you can set your own terms, Dr. Park told me when I proposed the arrangement. The program couldn't function without you, so we'll accommodate whatever schedule works for your family. 10 years after David left, I received an invitation to speak at his former medical school about professional ethics and the impact of misconduct on families. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was being invited to address students at the institution where David had trained before destroying his career. I accepted the invitation and developed a presentation specifically for that audience. I talked about the pressures of medical training, the importance of ethical decision-making, and the broader consequences of professional misconduct. Some of you may be struggling with financial pressure, relationship stress, or academic challenges, I told the audience of medical students. These pressures are normal, but they don't justify compromising your professional ethics. There are resources available to help you navigate these challenges without destroying your career or harming other people. After my presentation, several students approached me with questions about managing the stress of medical training while maintaining healthy relationships. I spent an hour talking with them about communication, financial planning, and the importance of treating partners as equals rather than support systems. One student mentioned that she'd heard about a former graduate who'd been convicted of fraud and asked if I knew anything about the case. I confirmed that I was familiar with the situation and used it as an opportunity to discuss the long-term consequences of professional misconduct. That individual's choices didn't just destroy his own career, I explained. They caused financial and emotional trauma for his family, damaged the reputation of this institution, and required significant resources to investigate and prosecute. Professional misconduct creates ripple effects that extend far beyond the individual practitioner. Driving home from the medical school, I reflected on how completely my life had changed since David left. I'd gone from facing eviction and working multiple minimum wage jobs to becoming a nationally recognized expert in healthcare compliance. I'd survived financial trauma and relationship betrayal to build a stable, loving marriage and become a mother. Most importantly, I'd transformed my personal experience into work that helped prevent other people from experiencing similar trauma. Every medical student who completed my ethics training was less likely to make the choices that had destroyed David's career and nearly destroyed my life. That evening, James and I put Emma to bed and sat on our couch talking about the presentation and how far I'd come since my first marriage. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if David hadn't left? He asked. I considered the question seriously. If David hadn't left, I probably would have continued working multiple jobs to support his career while sacrificing my own professional development. I might never have gone to graduate school, developed expertise in compliance, or found work that was personally meaningful. I think I would have remained financially and professionally dependent on someone who didn't respect or value me, I said. His leaving was devastating at the time, but it forced me to develop independence and discover capabilities I didn't know I had. James nodded and squeezed my hand. His loss was definitely my gain, he said. 11 years after David left, I was promoted to Vice President of Compliance and Ethics at my medical center with responsibility for developing policy at the health system level. My salary had reached 6 figures, and I was invited to speak at conferences around the world about professional ethics and family impact of misconduct. Emma was walking and talking, and James and I were discussing whether to have another child. Our life together was stable and fulfilling in ways I couldn't have imagined during those dark months when I faced eviction. I still occasionally thought about David and wondered how his life had turned out, but those thoughts no longer carried anger or sadness. He'd made choices that destroyed his career and our marriage, but those same choices had ultimately led me to a better life than I would have had if he'd stayed. Sometimes I wondered if David ever realized that his comment about not being able to love someone who reminded him of his struggle had been a gift, even though he'd intended it as cruelty. By rejecting me for representing his difficult years, he'd freed me to build a life where my contributions were valued rather than taken for granted. On quiet evenings when Emma was asleep and James was reading beside me, I felt grateful for the journey that had brought me to this point. The trauma of David's abandonment and the stress of near eviction had been terrible to experience, but they'd also revealed strengths I didn't know I possessed and led me to work that made a meaningful difference in other people's lives. I'd learned that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can also be the catalyst for the best thing that happens to you. David's leaving had felt like the end of my world, but it had actually actually been the beginning of a better world than I'd ever imagined possible.